This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you advertise on LinkedIn, you can build lasting relationships with customers that often translate to high-quality leads, website traffic, and higher brand awareness. For a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit, go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. Terms and conditions apply. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 515, Tronc It. For Monday, October 8th, 2018. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. We hear about purpose-driven marketing constantly these days, and the successes are typically spectacular. But is purpose truly the panacea that everyone says that it is? Or is it more about opportunism and social pandering? Tonight, we'll discuss. Also, whether billable hours are bad for relationships, why Foursquare is getting another 33 million, the power of custom magazines, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal of marketing consultancy Future Forth, Mr. Dave Delaney. Hi, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Now, also with us, we have the Admiral himself and co-founder of innovation consultancy, the HMS Beagle, author, speaker, Mr. Joseph Jaffe. Joe, welcome back, man.
Ahoy there, matey. It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It does not. And finally,
you'll get there, you'll get there.
And finally, from Viacom, we welcome back the Executive Vice President of Audience Science, Mr. Julian Zilberbrand. Julian.
Thanks for having me back, Bob. I think you could start calling me the Lieutenant.
Nice.
I am not giving military titles to anybody else on this show. Well, let's jump right in and talk about purpose-driven marketing. You can't throw a rock in an ad agency these days without hitting someone touting the benefits of purpose-driven marketing. Customers want to do business with brands that are guided by a higher calling, or so the trope goes. So, Dave, are you seeing purpose-driven tactics for marketing always delivering benefits, or is this mostly another form of brand opportunism? What's your take on the whole purpose-driven craze that's been going on for, last 10 years now?
I think it's great. First of all, I mean, it has converted me to become a loyal customer for certain brands just because they've done interesting campaigns and things that actually, were important to me. Like, for example, I look at CVS, who cut out tobacco products, and by doing that, and as a reformed former smoker, that's something that's really near and dear to my heart. And so, just seeing that alone and the campaign that they did around that was really impactful. And so for me, I'm seeing it happen more and more. It seems these days there seems to be a lot more happening with it. But I find it really is effective.
Do you agree with this, Joe? I mean, do you think that it's always a good thing to do purpose-driven marketing? Because, I love the example of the CVS getting rid of cigarettes. It's such a powerful statement about we're a health company. And yet, at the same time, how easy it is to get rid of a product that's in a dying industry, that's vilified. It seems more about opportunism, and maybe that's not a bad thing, but it seems less about purpose and more about jumping on the bandwagon and finding those critical strategic decisions to make that make you look good in the social media's, the social media discussion.
Yeah, I mean, look, I love this topic because I always look at this, this renaissance or this embracing of purpose-based marketing. And I say, first of all, when wasn't this important? When wasn't it important to have a purpose? How is it possible that companies are suddenly discovering their purpose, their reason for being, their why? I mean, I even write in my new book, I write, let's stop saying start with why and rather start with WTF. Because it's such an amorphous and open-ended type of way to go into a conversation. I think instead of talking about purpose, we need to walk the talk. And so I love the example of CVS. Absolutely love it. I'm not sure though whether do we define that as purpose-based marketing, or do we just define it as a company? I mean, I like what you said. Sometimes we're looking at companies that are maybe mature or stagnating or looking for a bit of invigoration, and so they kind of turn to this kind of program. But I love CVS, what they did for all the right reasons. I just think that's kind of bravery, and I think it's about taking a stand. And look, and if we want to call it purpose, let's call it purpose. But if CVS didn't have a purpose that laddered up into, for me, that's nothing more than just a one-off campaign, and it will be short-lived.
And you look at Patagonia too. Like in December, Patagonia sued Donald Trump because of his moves to remove protections of two national monuments in Utah. I think it was like the Grand Staircase and Bears Ears, the national monuments. And so he tried. So during that time, if you remember, Patagonia actually they reskinned their landing page, their homepage of their website. It was big black page with big white bold letters that said, "The president stole your land," and very impactful.
Doesn't that feel a little bit opportunistic versus really purposeful? I mean, I think to some degree it has to be, and it is a little bit of both. I think today's, there's been enough research shown at this point that today's consumer needs to have some kind of social social impact for you to have a connection to a brand. And I use the term pretty loosely because, how connected are you to every single possible brand? At the same time, the opportunity to take advantage of that kind of approach and use that for tactical reasons has to exist as well. And it's got to be somewhat of a healthy mix of both.
Absolutely. I don't think it's a way I don't think if they're doing it in a sneaky way, only to capitalize on that, then I think they're going to get dinged for that. But if it's something that's near and dear to their hearts and the soul of the company itself, then it makes complete sense. And so by doing that and taking that stand, then you get your most passionate consumers and new customers as well as a result of that. I read there was a purpose study by Cohn Porter Novelli I read about. And the quote was 78% of Americans believe companies must do more than just make money. They must positively impact society as well. And 2/3 of consumers say they would switch to a product from a purpose-driven company. And 68% say they would feel more willing to share content with their social networks from purpose-driven companies.
I call bull.
It's pretty impactful.
I call bull on all of that. I mean, I know that people say in studies that we want a purpose-driven company. We want a company that's socially responsible.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to making a decision to buy, you go for the product that looks good, that your friends have, that you find is cheapest. I mean, the same drivers still apply. You just have the added benefit of saying, and they cure cancer, or yes, they're giving shoes to kids in Africa. It doesn't seem like it's truly.
If you have two products in your hand at a store, and you've got two different brands that compete with one another, and one you are aware of makes a big stand about something you care about that's consistent with the brand itself, wouldn't you decide to purchase that even if it was a couple bucks higher?
I would 1000% agree with that statement, and I think the difference, and I'll just state it two different ways. One is maybe the problem is the phrase purpose-based marketing, right? It's that word marketing.
Yes.
This has to be bigger in this case than marketing. It has to be the entire company's, and it has to be completely transparent, because you don't want to see a company that says we're taking a stand and eliminating selling cigarettes,
Yeah.
And then at the same time finding out that they're not, paying minimum wage or they're paying below minimum wage.
I find that most companies that make a stand these days are making very easy stands, very populist stands, things that they know that their audience is going to come right along with them on. And it's not really making a kind of stand that you would associate with having a purpose. I mean, sometimes purpose leads you to make decisions that are not necessarily good for your bottom line, and it's for me, that seems like the bigger story when it comes to purpose. Maybe it comes down to we're just using the word purpose for the wrong types of campaigns. That purpose is more about having a lighthouse within your organization that shines in one direction and shows you exactly where you're supposed to be going so that you don't land on the rocks.
Look, we've all worked in corporate America in one form or the other, on some level or the other. I don't know how many companies truly have a soul. Of course it exists. Of course it exists. So I don't want to categorize every company that way. But I would say if you look at the vast majority of companies, to say that they genuinely have a soul, I think is a lot to ask. Now, are there tactical reasons and effective reasons for which you might have a soul and something that you stand for as an organization? Of course, it's there. And if that aligns to some kind of purpose that can be used to make you more money, then by all means do it. But I think to assume to some degree that the heart and soul of most corporations truly stand for something meaningful, I think that's probably in the minority. Now, if you could, the rest of the majority might, then choose to use certain social things, socially engineered things to make decisions about how they're going to communicate with their consumers. That's a little different. And I think when we start conflating, truly having a purpose as an organization and using something for, tactical reasons, I think we'll find that most of the time it's for tactical reasons as opposed to really truly soulful reasons.
Yeah, I believe that really to do this most effectively, first you've got to know your audience, right? And you've got to be able to find a way to help them or to show your support with them in a meaningful way. You've got to find ways to remind your customers of the values you share as well, right? And there's a company called Rippled I read about, which did a good job with that. They actually have an annual I think it's called the Our Progress report or something, or Our Progress, Your Impact annual report. And it shares information about how they've saved carbon savings, water reduction, sugar avoidance, and stuff like that. But I think the third main point about this is having your employees on board with it as well. And that brings me to REI, another outdoor company, strangely enough, which, if you guys remember, in 2015, they did the Black Friday event where they closed all of their stores, 143 locations for Black Friday. They closed it, and they had this campaign called Opt Outside. They used the hashtag Opt Outside, and all 12,000 employees were encouraged to go outside and do something and have fun. And so they closed the store on presumably the most, the most profitable day of the year, Black Friday. They closed all their stores, and they earned 2.7 billion PR impressions, 1.4 million social media mentions, and they were able to persuade 1 million people to get outside. And they saw a significant increase in new memberships. So it actually did pay off for them as well. So
do we know? And I don't know this. Are they now forever closed on Black Friday?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that. They did do something the following year in 2016. But I don't remember exactly the specifics of it. So I don't know. That's a good question.
One of the problems I have with this use of purpose so willy-nilly to describe these situations is that we're talking about doing good as opposed to really having a purpose. I mean, if a company has a purpose, like Patagonia has a purpose. I mean, from the beginning of the founding of the company, they have been environmentalists, and their purpose is to encourage the enjoyment of the outdoors and to preserve the outdoors. And it's just and it's not a cause for them. It's a purpose. It's a guiding light in the company. Whereas making a decision to get rid of cigarettes, I mean, it's just it kind of fits in with your purpose. But CVS, it's kind of hard for me to say before that moment they had a purpose,
Well, yeah, and I think it gets back to what Joe was saying with the confusion over, because I've read, cause-driven marketing, purpose-driven marketing, and then even what was it, brand standing as well.
Yeah.
Which are all sort of terms that summarize kind of the same thing in a way. So it kind of confuses it a little.
Well, there's some. I don't know whether it was Dave or Julian who said it, which is how many companies have a soul,
Right.
And I thought that was a brilliant statement, because the reality is no company has a soul, because a company isn't a human. A company isn't an organic or organism. A company is ultimately, something incorporated in Delaware, or a bunch of financial statements. It's the people inside the company. But going beyond this idea of having a soul, there is this idea of, you can do good or you can be good. And if you are good, you're naturally going to do good. And I think one of the hardest things in defense, and to kind of, cut them a little bit of slack, these large corporations, it's really hard to change course if in fact you truly do not have a soul, not only in terms of your corporate shell, but even the people inside your company in the boardroom. That's why it's so much easier for, I could rattle off about 20 startups, the Third Loves and the Bompuses and the Warby Parkers and the Toms, and and each one of these companies, every single one of them has started out and built their business from the ground up, giving back, being good, doing good. And that's why it's going to come down to, if there's any, corporate executives listening, you better believe that consumers tomorrow and the next day and the day after that will hold two products next to each other, and they will choose the one, even if it is the more expensive one, based on what they perceive to be from a brand that has a soul.
And when I used to run social media for Griffin Technology a million years ago, I would have customers, and I actually had a customer from an Apple store have a Griffin product in one hand and a competitor product in the other hand, and actually tweeted me that they bought it because they knew me, because we corresponded on Twitter before, because I was the voice and face of the company. So I experienced that firsthand. So yeah.
And you have a soul.
I do.
Is it always, is the purpose always necessary, though? I mean, it's just like, I know we're putting forward these scenarios where a customer's out there in the marketplace and they're holding two products in their hand, and one has a purpose, one doesn't, and which one you're going to choose. I don't think that is always going to be the case. And, from the standpoint of playing with the purpose-driven approach, you also have to take a stand, and taking a stand potentially alienates customers.
Oh, CVS did,
Right.
I mean, I kept hearing so many people complain that they'd go to CVS or I saw it online or whatever, that people would complain that they didn't sell cigarettes anymore. Or I had friends complain about it. But the fact is that they rebranded as more of a health, like a pharmacy, which is ultimately what they are, but really focused on CVS Health. And so they took a hit, by the way. I mean, last I checked, they lost $2 billion as a result of cutting out tobacco products. So like they took a major hit, but they think it's a long play and a very strong branding play to show that they actually really do care about your health.
I think that we're giving them too much credit, because it's just like, it was only going to be a matter of time before the lawsuits targeted the sellers. It's just like, it's not just the tobacco companies who are at fault for promotion of cigarettes. It's also the retail operations that are selling these products. And I think that there was some legal jeopardy involved with it that forced them to make that decision. So
I think when you spend multiple billions, I forget the number, it was 50 something or something to that effect, to buy a whole host of pharmaceuticals, that there are other compliance issues that you have to do with that as a retailer. And I think that it isn't 100%. I'm not saying it isn't 100% altruistic, but I don't know that it is 100% altruistic either. So I don't want to give them too much credit. I don't want to take away credit, but I think that there's a lot of things that go on when a company like CVS invests billions and billions upon dollars in pharmaceuticals to kind of own the entire health cycle, and then they turn around and sell cigarettes. There might be an issue just with that.
And don't get me wrong, I agree with you, Julian, there. And it's just like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-purpose marketing. I think the purpose marketing has a lot of value when you're trying to, create an image for a brand or trying to reimagine who you are in the marketplace. But at the same time, I think that a company needs to look very critically about whether or not they should pursue this particular type of strategy. Because I don't think that in every case it's a good decision for every single brand to get involved with a purpose-driven approach. You may win a few followers or a few social mentions and people talk about you online, but it could potentially alienate huge swaths of your customer base. And and make a lot of enemies in the process. So, I mean, making that decision can't be done lightly, and it can't be treated as a panacea for every brand decision. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Joe? I mean, it's just like, do you still believe that every company should have a purpose?
Well, listen, I mean, every company has to have a purpose.
Well, I mean, a purpose besides making fiduciary decisions
the thing that I find is interesting as I was listening to you guys talking is this idea of, first of all, there's a difference with purpose and then purpose-based marketing. There's also a difference in this idea of taking a stand. And I think we're citing a lot of examples of companies that have taken a stand. And that doesn't necessarily have to be, purpose-based marketing at all. I was thinking of here is a purpose-based marketing example, which is Nike's endorsement and kind of getting behind Colin Kaepernick. I mean, that's pretty ballsy.
I think that's a glaring example of opportunism, quite frankly. I mean, I don't see that as being necessarily Nike's taking a quote unquote stand.
You guys are making my point. It's a little bit of both. It always is.
But it certainly is.
But you know what? It's an interesting example. Is it opportunistic? Sure. I was going to say perhaps. Let's say sure. But the Nike brand. First of all, the Nike brand taking a pretty big risk, I think, and second of all, being able to stand behind that decision and do it in an authentic way and be able to say this is a position we're taking. I see it less.
I don't see a lot of. I don't see
the return.
I don't know. I don't see as much risk as you're saying. I mean, it's just like I see it as being a little bit risky, but it's the kind of risk that a poker player takes when they know that 3 aces wins 90% of the time. So I'm going to put all in on this. I mean,
Bob, it's a risk in the ratio of 51 to 49 based on the current. Senate, but I mean, they could have risked alienating 50% of the country.
But there's a lot to that because I think to some extent you're going to alienate if you said, Joe, you said something which is true, right? It has a political reality, right? And if you look at voters, right, the numbers in total volume lean left. The voting results were right for, obvious reasons. And if you're doing the marketing effort and you're looking at it from a political standpoint, you have more people that are leaning in one way than the other. And while you are going to alienate an extreme section on one side, most aren't going to bother with the trouble of caring. And so it is a risk, but it's a very calculated, I thought, well done and well taken risk.
Oh, yeah,
I still
absolutely.
think at the same time, it's opportunistic while it is risky and says something about the company. Yeah. And it's just like every time I come to the conclusion that it always has to be both, because show me a company that's willing to take the financial risk of standing for something where it's going to severely damage the company. That's when I'll kind of lean in the other direction.
Well, we got to move on and talk next about billable hours and how billable hours may be part of the problem with the relationship building with clients. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsor, LinkedIn, because when it comes to marketing your business, it's all about reaching the right audience at the right time. You want to connect with them with a message that's going to resonate absolutely the best it possibly can. And if you want to target your customers where they are engaging every day and when they're ready to make a decision, LinkedIn is the perfect place for you to run your next ad campaign. Now, when you advertise on LinkedIn, they are absolutely, hands down, the world's largest professional network. We know this about them. They are the absolute leader in professional networking, and you have the opportunity there to build long-term relationships with the kind of customers who matter to your business. Relationships that often translate into things like high-quality leads, translate into website traffic, even generate higher brand awareness. Over 575 million professionals, let that sink in for a minute, 575 million professionals engage with content on LinkedIn, and chances are your future customers are among them. And let's not forget the targeting, because LinkedIn is not like other social networks. LinkedIn has marketing tools that'll help you target your customers with precision you won't get on other platforms. because you're not able to just target things like demographics. You're able to target down to the job title. You can get entire companies on your list. You can target right down to the industry and get the entire industry that you're trying to reach in your wheel set. And remember, better targeting equals a message your customers care about, which in turn leads to more trust built with your customers. And one last fact, I want you to keep in mind that 4 out of 5 of these customers, 4 out of 5 who are on LinkedIn, are decision makers at their company. 4 out of 5 are decision makers. So you're building relationships that really matter with the people who matter most to your business. Now, to redeem a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit, that's right, they're going to give you a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit just to get started and launch your first campaign. I want you to go to this address. Go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. That's linkedin.com/BeanCast for your free $100 ad credit. Now, terms and conditions apply. You'll find them all on the site. But I just want you to remember one thing. LinkedIn is absolutely the best place to target your next campaign. And we thank them very much for their support of our program. Well, once again, the practice of agencies billing by hours versus by project is being called into question. And once more, the ad world is considering the fact that they are woefully incapable of knowing upfront how many hours each project will take. So, Joe, what are the pluses and minuses to a project fee approach? I know that project fees is more in your wheel set, and I wanted to find out why you consider that an approach that's maybe more desirable than going for an hourly billing approach. What's your take?
Well, I would expand on the idea of project versus versus billable hours. And I actually think that the industry, I'd like to say the industry has evolved beyond that, but maybe the best way to say the industry would like to evolve beyond that. There are a whole bunch of other ways of thinking about compensation, including performance-based pricing, and it's something that I think even Coke introduced, I want to say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, which was this idea of value-based and deliverable-based pricing or compensation. And then I would add where I would push and advocate is royalty-based and equity-based. The example always being the agency that came up with the M&M's characters, which I believe was TBWA. They should be, every day they should be getting themselves a big fat royalty check, or some kind of residuals. This is the equivalent of syndication for those characters that have not only lived on in advertising, but through the M&M store, so on and so forth. So this is a problem that we've been talking about in the industry for decades, and I think the general consensus is that charging by the hour is an absolute flawed practice, especially when thinking about the higher value products like account planning or strategic planning and the creative function, amongst others.
Well, okay. So there are a lot of different ways that we can approach this that are providing more value to the agency. But from a standpoint of providing value to the client, why do you feel that having a billable hours approach actually can maybe harm the relationship that you're trying to build with your client? I mean, it seems to me that there needs to be a reason why billable hours continue to be used so prevalently in our industry, and yet they seem to be so problematic when it comes down to negotiating or reconciling accounts with the client.
There are many reasons, and I think the one that really, I think, well, first I always used to use. Do you remember the movie Weekend at Bernie's?
Yes.
And for me, that's kind of what the agency world has become. That the client walks through the cube maze, and wants to see all the people working on their business, and there are a couple of dead bodies, and someone lifts their hand up, with their sunglasses on, just to wave to them. But that's what it's come down to, just putting fresh meat or even, old meat on someone's account to be able to justify the spend. But there was something in one of the source articles that really leapt out at me, and that's this idea of why are we punishing an agency for working quicker? If they can produce the same deliverable in half the time, or if they can produce a deliverable in the same time or even half the time that actually can produce more and deliver more, double the ROI, by not changing the way we compensate, we're actually essentially punishing them or creating a process that doesn't reward moving quicker. And of course, the analogy is, many of these large companies are getting their lunch stolen by the smaller, more nimble, more agile, and quicker moving startups.
I've been saying the exact same thing for 11 years. I've said that. I've had this conversation with client after client. I mean, it's just like, why should you be punished if I take too long to do the project? And why should I be punished if I take too little time to do the project? I mean, the project is worth what the project is worth.
Hold on, did you just agree with me?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I definitely agree with you.
Well, here's the question. Is it the agencies that are looking for the billing, hourly billing, or is it clients that are comfortable with paying that kind of fee?
Well, it comes down to, from what I understand from talking with people in the agency world, is that the model of billable hours is so intrinsically built into how they run their business that they can't get away from it. And the clients have now become enamored with it as well, because it enables them to negotiate down upon, how many bodies we're putting against a project and how many hours are those bodies going to be spending doing a project, as opposed to, really valuing the project and understanding how much this is worth. It's advantageous. I think that the clients have found a reason to adopt it and to feel comfortable with it, because it's helped them out in their procurement and negotiations.
I think a lot of this comes down to comfort, right? I think most, when Joe talks about potential performance-based billing and things of that nature, there are inherent risks with going outside of the norm. And I think that it's both comfort on both client's part and agency part, and not willing to take risks, because I think the opportunity to do value-based, or the opportunity to kind of, do what Joe suggested M&Ms do, or I should say TWA should have done, and get some kind of long-term royalty play. It's a risk. And I think most companies are risk averse. And if we can get more and more companies that are willing to take some tactical risks, whether that's on the client side or whether that's on the agency side, then you'll see the model begin to change.
I thought it was interesting, the article too, talking about the angle of the pros of it as it applies to the agency itself, like internally tracking hours of work involved in different projects and things. I thought that was an interesting sort of positive side of it, but I certainly agree with you guys on why it's kind of ridiculous by the sound of it.
I think that the bigger question is, would going to a project-based fee actually improve relationships between agencies and clients, which, as we all know, are at an all-time low at this point, and there's a lot of acrimony between the two parties in most situations. I mean, you read about it a lot in the news these days, how the A&A feels very taken advantage of because of the whole fiasco over the media billing and the kickbacks. So, it's just like billable hours may be part of the problem, but I'm wondering whether or not the problems run so deep that going to a project-based approach really solves nothing when it comes down to improving the relationship between an agency and a client.
Well, again, we've got to, when we say project, there's got to be an asterisk, and to say, and all the other forms of compensation beyond,
yeah, of course. I mean, all the other
but,
ones you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, but there are a couple of interesting ways, I think. First of all, I mean, I'll give you just a personal anecdote. During my time with Evolution, we would go and say the same thing, because, Bob, we both stand for the same things. You and I, we believe in the same things, and
Yes.
and we'd say, this is the project fee, and they go, yeah, we understand, and that's fine, that's great. But we just like an approximation of who's going to be on the business and what percentage of their time you're going to be spending on the business. And essentially all they did was they just, they just reverse engineered and calculated what the, what that average billable rate was. And so in a way, it ended up you even though you started a project, you ended up getting back to some kind of billable hour equivalent. And the thing that I always think about is, this may be a very bad example to quote Elon Musk at the moment, but can you imagine any company would have 30 minutes of Elon Musk's time to pick his brain, and boy, oh boy, would we like to pick that brain at the moment, and ask him any question and just break bread with him, have a glass of wine or two, and maybe, smoke a joint.
You South Africans all hang out together, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Elon and I are very close. No, but imagine, what would you pay for that 30 minutes? It would be such an astronomical amount that there's no way any procurement department or organizational structure or guideline, playbook would be able to tell you it was justified. But ultimately, you will pay what you believe that time is worth, or that value is. And so all of this stuff goes out the window, and it comes down to, I think, what you said, Bob, which is, it does come down to an acute distrust in the agency partnership, and/or just the ability not to perceive the value that is being provided at being higher than that which it's being priced at.
I think it's the latter. I really think it's the latter. I think the whole trust thing is way, way overblown. Clients switch agencies on a regular basis, and it's very rare that I've ever seen it's because they don't trust their agency. Typically, they're switching because they're not doing a good job, or there's a scapegoat reason, or whatever. There could be any number of reasons, but I very rarely see trust being the issue. I think the reality is exactly what Joe said. It's not understanding what the value is, not providing agencies not being able to market effectively what their value is and what they're bringing to the table, and therefore they don't know a different methodology with which they can charge from a billing perspective. If you don't understand how to communicate the value of what you're bringing, it's very hard to charge for it.
Yeah, that's exactly sort of what I was thinking too, is the background of of whomever's working on the team, like all of the years of experience that they bring to the table. I mean, those years of experience are worth a lot. And that's something that that doesn't probably get factored in. Joe, you mentioned that like clients may, try to calculate it on their own, as you mentioned that. Is that a common thing that comes up?
Well, it's not. I mean, this is just the case with us. It's not that they calculate it on their own, but when you give them the inputs, it's like saying, I'm not, don't tell me your revenue, just tell me, what your customer count and your ticket average are, and you just multiply the two together.
So oh, sorry, come on.
No, I was just going to say, so just, when it's just, and it is because of procurement departments coming and saying, we just want to know who's working on our business and give us an approximation, 20% of their time or 15% of their time, without being able to break out what their typical billable hourly rates are. You end up with a compound billable rate. And there are many, many companies that say, we're sorry, but we're just not going to pay an average or compound billable rate of more than $200 an hour.
So to that point, when they're asking for those sort of numbers, I guess, I think getting back to the point of like Julie made about the communication weaknesses in the part of the agency's marketing itself, maybe part of that communication should be, we're going to dedicate X% of time and so on and so forth. But also Joe Jaffe's going to be working on it. And Joe brings 25 years of marketing and PR and sales to the table. And he's won XYZ awards and written this many books. You know what I mean? So like factoring in that when you reveal that information of the percentages and things from the agency side, also, padding that with helping the client better understand, or the prospect better understand, what you are bringing to the table as well.
100%.
Well, I mean, we just normally throw in Elon Musk, but
and a bag of weed.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to move on.
Everybody wins.
We're going to move on and talk about Foursquare getting another $33 million in funding. Kind of wonder about that. Not really sure where they're getting those figures from.
Speaking of weed.
Yeah, but before we do that, we have to pause for just a moment for a word from our sponsor, AdRoll.
I come downstairs and I overhear my mum and dad talking in our native Farsi that, potentially we might lose our last shop, and we've always had stores growing up. I guess I was just in my own little bubble enjoying my job in music, and I didn't really realize that potentially our house was on the line. We both knew something had to change. I genuinely firmly believed in the digital process, in getting our garments seen online. I knew we needed help, and I knew we needed a platform to help get our content seen and our message heard. The first campaign that we engaged with AdRoll returned 27 times the ROI. I can turn back and say to Dad, look what we've accomplished.
To learn more about how Nav Salimian turned his family business into a global retail brand, visit adroll.com/BeanCast. That's ADROLL.com/BeanCast.
Well, just when you start to question the future marketing growth potential of location-based data, Foursquare gets another round of funding of $33 million. Now, I didn't know the Foursquare was still a thing. I mean, I knew it was around. I didn't realize that it was worth another $33 million. So, Julian, innovation in location-based efforts has been stagnating for a while. Things like privacy concerns and questionable effectiveness have been kind of bandied about as reasons. So does this funding signal renewed energy for the space and for Foursquare in particular, or just more of the same in this particular sector of the marketing world? What's your take on this?
I don't think this ushers in any new innovations that will change the game. I do think that Foursquare as a location-based company, and there are obviously many out there, location is a very relevant and important signal that you could use that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's, in the age of big data, in the age of more companies having data scientists, and in the age of more companies being much more tactically aware of all the possible signals that will help them make decisions, this is another opportunity to expand on that. I don't know that this is a game changer on any level. Obviously, I don't have, an understanding of the inner workings of the company and what they're trying to do or what they sold in to kind of get the extra money. But at the end of the day, I think location will continue to be a very relevant and important signal for a number of reasons. And I see no reason why there shouldn't be further investment and innovation in the space. On the other hand, I think you brought up a really good point, which is there is some question around the privacy concerns around that. Foursquare is an interesting thing because, in most cases, you're opting in to that scenario. And I think that makes a big difference in the privacy world with the tactic of being able to opt in to passing that level of data. So, does this change the game for them or anybody? I don't think it does. But I do think that there's enough reason for location-based companies to still be relevant, enough money to be made off the data set, and enough reason to continue to invest there to innovate. Although, again, I don't know how many more kind of innovative things you can do other than passing it potentially faster, helping to optimize your decision-making faster.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, just tacking on to that, when you look into this situation with the funding round, $33 million is a lot of money for me. But in terms of this type of operation at the stage that they're at,
it's not changing the game.
It's a stopgap measure to keep them in business, it feels like, which is not a sign of a trust in my eyes. And then the lead investment company, the lead VC that's funding this round or leading this round of funding is Simon Ventures, and Simon Ventures is from the mall fame. I mean, they basically have a real vested interest in having some kind of location-based technologies for their particular operations. So, I got to wonder what's really going on here. Is this a vote of confidence, or is this more about Simon maybe trying to do a little PR on their own part, and maybe they see something that we don't? I don't know. Dave, you were going to say something.
Let's consider where the opportunity might make a ton of sense, which is globally, potentially in the Asian markets, in India and in Southeast Asia and other markets where there are less, more mobile and less in the way of privacy concerns, and the opportunity to have location as a data point over there might be more valuable than it could be in the US or in Europe where there's a lot of regulation.
I'm curious with this all too, because like I've been on Foursquare since it launched. Probably I actually wanted to use Dodgeball before they launched Foursquare, so that's dating myself there. And then Foursquare made the horrible mix-up branding mistake of launching Swarm, and then confused the hell out of the users because Foursquare suddenly became sort of a Yelp, I guess, and then Swarm became sort of Foursquare. And it's funny because I actually still use Swarm from time to time, and Swarm is basically a check-in app that's owned by Foursquare, by the way. So I wonder, like I was coming back from speaking at a conference just a couple of weeks ago, and I was at an airport with a layover, and so I checked into the airport on Swarm and saw that a friend was actually in the airport, and we missed each other. But for a sec, and I joked, I messaged him, I'm like, finally found a reason for Swarm, and I don't know why I'm still checking in like I am, but. So I'm curious to see, and I think with the privacy concerns, certainly in North America and Europe, I think the loyal nerds like us who may want to play along with checking in at different locations and things, I think there's certainly a market for that. But I think on a larger scale, certainly, as I said, in North America and Europe, with privacy concerns as they are, I'm not so sure that people are going to start using it.
Yeah, they never were able to harness the power of gamifying location, so to speak. And putting that aside for a second, there was one byproduct that came out of it, which was that, I mean, at the time. I defended the fact that I was, now you know where my title comes from, Bob, that I was the mayor of the Admirals Club at JFK. But somebody dethroned me from that club. I was back there as quick as you. I would change terminals to be able to check in properly. But they never quite were able to figure out how to harness that power. And be able to tie that to proof of purchase and really build on that. But putting that aside, what did happen is that people were creating all of these entries. And so I was at one point created a whole syntax for, AA 120 from JFK to SFO, and I was creating gate check-ins as well, and many people were doing the same. And it's that back end and that whole treasure trove, if you will, of these location-based markers that developers are using, and that they've, I think, have continued to use and leverage beyond, the front end manifestation, which is a bunch of people like Dave and myself going and check into places.
One of the community though, like it brought a community of people together to play along, as you said, Joe. Like either you're trying to become a mayor of a location, or you're trying to add, you're adding tips for places. I'm still the first tip on Foursquare or Swarm now when you visit Nashville at the airport here. So it's interesting, and you had this community of people that interacted and that shared tips, and I even did things where I extracted my KPML feed from my Foursquare account and embedded it into my into Google Earth, and I could do a video walkthrough in not real time, but in a walkthrough of locations I was. So when I went to Puerto Rico with my wife, I was able to plug in my link from my feed and actually look at all the different locations and play it like a little film.
What you're talking about,
cool stuff to do.
What you're talking about though are user benefits, which are great, but they have absolutely no bearing, or at least little bearing on the brands themselves who we're trying to.
I think to some degree that the gamification part of it certainly kind of jumped the shark. I think it's more functionally relevant, right? That the capability is being built in by vast developers into a number of different places where the data points can be aggregated and sent to advertisers for one reason or another, so that they can provide a service to all the other app makers who are doing what they're doing. I think I could see a use case there where they provide a functional business to business purpose that they rev share. And that's a whole different story. And that's a different business model that has a much more long-term sustaining business, maybe not as big as the concept of what gamification could have been and what everybody thought the company would be. But in terms of actually being a long-term sustained business of passing location-based data via hundreds of thousands of apps. I think that there is a long-term play there that is sustainable, and that they could continue to do business a very long time, and maybe never reach the heights that people expected, but still maintain a pretty solid business.
Yeah, and I think that this dovetails nicely into another story that became a part of the discussion this week, which was that Instagram is being, the rumors are that Facebook is going to be starting to absorb their location data and use it for advertising purposes. And you know, for me, that's a bigger signal that these two events happening at the same time show that location is far from dead, and that it's more, that the most important thing in terms of the marketing world are those signals that are being tacitly given from people, as opposed to how cool your location app is. But, you know, all that, just the fact that every photo on Instagram gives you the chance to tag where you were when you had this photograph gives an important signal to advertisers about what users are actually doing, what they're interested in, what they're buying, what they're using. You know, all of that comes out of those signals that is just from tagging your photograph with a location. So I think that Julian's right on the money here in terms of, you know, what advertisers and marketers are looking for in the end. I mean, it's just like, and why Simon felt that it was a good time to invest in LinkedIn. I'm not LinkedIn, into that's our sponsor. No, investing in Foursquare at this particular moment.
I think you know, there's value in this. I feel that they don't do a good job. Well, even in location-based ads, I mean, to see the ads that are appealing to you, that are important to you, products and services or whatever, to see ads that are personalized to you, I think is a good experience on the user base, or on the consumer rather. But the consumer, I think so often they're just not promoted eloquently enough to the consumers to know that, like, these are ads. Like this comedian, Rory Scovel, amazing comedian, but he was coming to Nashville, and I guess I looked him up, and then I was on Instagram, and suddenly I saw the ad. Hey, Rory Scovel's coming to Nashville, and I clicked through and purchased tickets right away. So I appreciated that. But I think a lot of times consumers don't understand the benefits of this.
I think there's still a little ways to go. You know, what you gave is a really good example, but I think that there's a ways to go to figure out how to really impact creative with that signal versus just holistically having it be one of the signals that you're looking at to help make tactical decisions that oftentimes aren't always in real time. And I think the real time nature of it means that you have to have the capabilities to have copy adjusted based on location. And that's still kind of a place where I don't think we're 100% there yet.
No, we're not.
Well, moving on, our final topic, there was a fascinating look in Adweek at a recent trend of young brands creating magazines of their own, custom magazines, if you will, to support their product and enhance the perceived lifestyle surrounding it. And I got to throw this out to the panel. Is this truly a trend that more brands should be trying, or simply a good idea for a select few companies like Away, which was featured, the luggage maker? So, Dave, any thoughts on this?
I think it comes down to the cost of the time and effort and production of the physical magazine. So there's the cost that you have to factor into that. And then whether you can obviously recoup that cost and hopefully make something on the magazine is the key thing, right? So for example, you know, like a luggage company could include their own magazines in the luggage about travel. And if they work together with because this is an opportunity for, you know, sort of like-minded, similar but non-competitive brands to capitalize on. So you could have Southwest Airlines advertisements or coupons or whatever in this magazine, and then they could sell it because, you know, they're going to people in luggage, and people with luggage are traveling. So it's a no-brainer. So it's really that balance of making sure that you see the return on investment of this of the actual printing and the development of the content. And by the way, I'm a big proponent when I work with my clients and I teach them how to use digital marketing and all this stuff. I talk about reusing, reducing, recycling, and reusing old content, recycling it into new content, and reducing the stress of having to come up with new content, which I've often struggled with. And so here's a perfect example of like taking your best blog content and then just repurposing it for articles in the magazine. So you've already got that. If you already have an Instagram feed, you already have photos that you could be using in your own magazine as well. So I think it wouldn't be overly complicated to produce. And nowadays, with the cost of printing being much lower than it used to be, I think it's probably a good move.
But I would also add that, for me, this is DTC, the whole direct-to-consumer trend, mixed with just good old-fashioned. I mean, I totally agree with Dave. Good old-fashioned content strategy. It's just that it's not taking the form of a tweet or a Facebook post. It's taking the form of a good old-fashioned print or piece of collateral. And the thing that I would add here is why I love some of the examples, Away and Dollar Shave is, well, first of all, I mean, this is a little cynical, I know, and me being cynical, I know you're all shocked. But I often say, like, when people tell me what's the value of magazines today, I go, they have only one value, and that's to read in the toilet. Otherwise, there'd be no more magazines. They're the best thing to kind of page through when you're on the crapper. Hopefully, I can say that word. And so it works so well for Dollar Shave because they're putting together collateral that you're reading in the bathroom, in the same place that, whether you're in the bath or on the toilet, when you're actually using many of their products. And for Away, it's just a great opportunity because when is the one time that okay, I lied, it's not just the crapper, it's also when you're traveling, when you want to pick up a magazine. And they don't even have to, talk about random stuff and lifestyle. They can actually talk about travel tips and power tips and destinations, and it really is just a kind of reinvigorated play of what Amex did pretty well with Departures magazine. The byproduct of being able to sell and monetize through like-minded advertisers or advertising, I think that, as long as we don't put the cart before the horse, that may come, but I don't think that is the primary reason to do it. And in fact, if it does become, it could actually ruin it.
So here's what I'll say, Bob. When you posed the question, you said, "Is this a trend, or does this work for just a select few advertisers?" I mean, it's certainly the latter in terms of this certainly wouldn't work as a strategy for every possible kind of product marketer. On the other hand, I think for certain product marketers, if they are content creators, which I think every brand, regardless of the brand, should be a content creator, this could be an effective form of content that they create for their potential customers. But I think it's a very niche kind of marketer that this works for at scale with any real value. Away is a great example. Anybody that you kind of pointed out fit into kind of, Dollar Shave Club. Joe says you read it in the crapper because you use the tools in the crapper and so on and so forth. So I do think very much so this is limited to a select few kind of advertisers. I think it's a great piece of content if you could create a nice piece of content and include it in some kind of fashion. So I went to see Venom the other night with my son. He wanted to see the movie. On the way out of the movie, we got a comic book. That's a nice piece of marketing. My kid then wanted to go buy more Venom comic books later on, and it's a nice cycle for Marvel and so on and so forth. Whether or not that works with every possible advertiser, I don't want to see toothpaste provide me magazines, and I don't want to see paper towels provide me magazines. So I do think it's very, very niche, but I think it can be a great way to kind of be a content creator and provide value to your consumer.
I could totally see a toothpaste brand doing a magazine on positivity, positive living, and people smiling all the time.
Everybody's a lifestyle brand.
Well, it's time for the Ad Fail 5, but before we get to that segment of the show, I want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Dave Delaney. You can find him at futurefourth.com. That's the home of his consultancy, right? That's how you would best describe it. So tell us what's going on in your world, Dave. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really excited. I've got something, you can find it at communicationreboot.com, and it's a in-person workshop that I'm doing with teams to improve communication with businesses, that improves all of that stuff. And I won't bore you with all the details, but if you go over to the site, there's information there all about it. And at Future Fourth as well, there's actually links to the holiday inspired training for Communication Reboot. So check it out.
Awesome. Definitely check that out. Next up, Joseph Jaffe. You can find him at thehmsbeagle.com. That's the home of his consultancy with Lynn Power, who was on just a couple of weeks ago, and she did phenomenal. You were up against some real competition here, Joe. So glad that you can make it. Tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
That episode, by the way, was hysterical. You just, I was busy laughing along at you guys getting all hysterical with one another. So it was definitely good.
Well, I mean, you got Lynn Power and you got Brandy Boatner. I mean, good God, it was like a fun fest for me to be on that program.
and by the way, full credit to everyone, because you had 2 panelists as opposed to 3, and so it's always a little bit harder when there are no passengers when it comes down to 2 panelists. So I think you guys did a great job. I thoroughly enjoyed that episode. The idea with the HMS Beagles, we say that we help our clients navigate the journey to survival. But a lot of people were saying, well, what do you mean to survival? We want to do better than survive. And I think the point is that we make is, look, we're always in the survival business nowadays. And it's a never-ending journey. There is no destination, and you'll never arrive at survival. But ultimately, the hope is to move from survival to what we call thrival. And so, our workshops, Dave, you talk about your workshops. Our workshops we call voyages, and in the maiden voyage, the deliverables are a survival plan, but ultimately to then get to a growth plan or return to growth plan. So that's just a little bit of elaboration. And the other thing I will say is, on October 18th, we're having a little soiree, a little launch party for the HMS Beagle in New York City. So, if you listen to the BeanCast, clearly you're a good person, a smart person, and someone worth knowing. And certainly if you're one of the panelists, to my panelists today, if you guys are around in New York City the evening of October 18th, just shoot me an email, Jaffe at thehmsbeagle.com, and I would love to put you on the list. And Bob, you are at the top of the VIP invitee list.
Nice. I have already RSVP'd, so I will definitely be there.
If I'm there, I will be there too, Joe. Thank you.
That'd be awesome.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, Julian Zilberbrand. You can find him at Viacom.com. Little tiny company. You might have heard of them. So tell us, what's going on in your world, Julian? What would you like to promote?
With me, it's always very, very simple. Please watch television. Specifically, please watch my cable networks. Do not disconnect your cable. In fact, reconnect your cable if you have disconnected your cable, and go ahead and turn on some Comedy Central, some MTV, or some Nickelodeon, and brighten up your day, because I'd like to eat. Thank you very much.
Well played.
That's
and as
PSA.
For me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. You can even find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, transcribeme.com is our official transcription partner, providing transcription services for every episode of the BeanCast. I'm about 2 weeks behind. I've got 2 of them sitting in my inbox I got to put up, but they are definitely doing a great job, and we love them for it. And they're giving you a special deal. Just go to transcribeme.com/BeanCast, and you'll get a special discount when you use them for your first transcription service through the service. So check it all out at transcribeme.com/BeanCast. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, meme costume parties, meme costume parties are all the rage this year. So, of course, brands are getting in on the action. Unfortunately, Joe, Urban Outfitters decided to phone in their effort by simply packaging together a $59 sports bra and leggings combo and calling it an influencer costume. Now, I think this is funny, but it did get some negative feedback from the audience. What's your take on this?
Well, I agree. I think it's so whacked and so like just out of control that it actually is quite funny. And I almost think it has a charm about it. Almost if you're prepared to laugh at yourself or laugh at so-called influencers, it just seemed like there might be a silver lining. I'm just not sure where it is. It might be actually in the bra. But I guess, look, if it works for Kim Kardashian, it can work for anyone, right?
I guess so. Now, next up, eBay made public evidence that Amazon was using the eBay merchant messaging system, Julian, in order to poach merchants over to the Amazon sellers platform. This is just ballsy.
All's fair in love and war, I guess.
Yeah, this one got me. All right, next up, e-cig maker Juul had their offices raided by federal investigators who seized thousands of documents pertaining to, wait for it, Dave, wait for it, their marketing, specifically their intentional marketing to teens. Now, of course, Juul completely denies this. Obviously, the FDA is looking for some kind of evidence to support their claims. What's your take on that one?
I just wish they would, decide on whether these things are, safe or not. My spidey sense says not, but that's just me. Yeah. I mean, it's just terrible. And as I mentioned, it's so strange that this came out twice that I stopped smoking. I quit like 21 years ago, so it's been a while. But it's still a thing that drives me crazy, and especially having two young kids who are impressionable and seeing the number of the fact that teenagers are among like the most people that smoke or that use e-cigarettes. I hope they throw the book at them if they did wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what this company needs, which I guess is Philip Morris, right? It's
Yeah.
Joel is not Philip Morris, but that's
well, I guess what they need is a purpose-based marketing plan.
Well played, my friend. Well played.
Well, a grand old ad fail comes to an ignominious end. Julian Tronc, Tronc, has given up on the worst name change ever and is now back to calling themselves the Tribune Company once again.
I mean, has there been a bigger fail than Tronc as a name? It's so bad. You know what? Good for them for recognizing the mistake and changing it. Bad on them for it taking 2 years to do so, and worse on them for coming up with it in the first place.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, it sounds suspiciously like another word I don't like.
I don't know what word that would be.
It's a living SNL skit. I could picture the Tronc as far as, it's terrible.
I could totally see that.
Well, Ogilvy, in the middle of tweeting out a series of pro tips from ECD George Tenenbaum, hastily had to delete one that said that women, and specifically women, Joe, should forget about trying to get on one of those 40 under 40 lists, but stick instead to your knitting. Now, obviously, I know the expression stick to your knitting, but to single out women specifically in this comment really came off as a tone-deaf comment, didn't it?
Look, this is the company that once said, do not insult the consumer. She is your wife.
Yep, absolutely. Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online, use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. It's just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
Dave,
stuff, boys.
it's been too long, and Julian, it was great conversation. And,
Yeah, for sure.
And I normally hate my panelists, so this is a big, you know, I'm joking.
Take that as a compliment then. Fantastic.
No, I'm joking. This was really fun.
Yeah, it's like exactly. Yeah.
Cool beans.